So just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. First, I'm going to give you some public safety marketing statistics and how public safety is really a driver for this industry, not just from a sales perspective, but a driver in creating the longevity that we can all be working in this industry in 5 years, 10 years from now. I'll be talking about some specific thermal imaging capabilities, some of the features that are available on thermal imaging cameras that you may or may not know, and go through those in detail, and then just a very select few uses of thermal imaging in public safety, just to give you some visuals to back that up. So when I'm talking about public safety, as Romeo mentioned, we're talking about firefighting, law enforcement, and search and rescue. And even though that these things are very different in how they're achieved, there's common links throughout all three of them, and these common links are not only how they're using drone technology and how they're using thermal imaging, but also how they get budget for these things and their interaction with the public. So when we're talking about public safety, even though if you're a firefighter, you can learn some stuff of how law enforcement agencies are using them and vice versa. So there's a common thread through all of them that I'm trying to share. So when we start with firefighting, as drones have become a tool in the tool belt of public safety, it offers a really interesting and important opportunity to add value to this technology. Every time that someone in public safety puts a drone up, it validates our claim that this stuff is meaningful and no longer just a toy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So public safety, the size of public safety presents a really interesting opportunity for anyone in this drone industry. And when I talk about that opportunity, it should be taken as an opportunity to drive value out of the technology, not an opportunity of merely just revenue generation. I think that when people hear about the explosion of drones and the interest of drones, some people get into it for the wrong reasons. And I think if you're doing it for the right reasons, you're developing tech for the long term, not just trying to get a short-term gain. So if you look at the size of the number of firefighters, there's 1.2 million firefighters in the United States alone, and those are dispersed over around 30,000 departments. And so the map that you're looking at the left, and it's hard to see here, but what that's depicting is it's categorizing departments by the number of people that they represent in their jurisdiction. And the reason I'm showing this is that public safety and firefighting is not a regional thing, it's not a national thing, but it's an international need. And so we as manufacturers or software providers or value-added resellers can be confident going into this space that there's a market out there that can justify putting in the investment because there's going to be a return. There's a huge market out there and the use case is justified. With 34 million responses of fire departments each year in the United States alone, this is 34 million opportunities for technology to be deployed and validated. And it's not necessarily each case can use a drone, but when you have 34 million occasions that new technology can be used to test it out and to give that validation, again, it's a huge opportunity for us to start listening to the needs of firefighters and of public safety in general, and to reward them as being early adopters by hearing their needs and developing products on their behalf. And that's from the FLIR perspective and from the DJI perspective, that's exactly what we're doing. So every time that you interact with someone that is a manufacturer of this technology and you share a story or you give that feedback, it's so valuable for us to get it right because we're not in the field on a regular basis. So it's my estimation, and this is a personal estimation, you won't find this on any of the Forbes numbers that they put out, but around 1,000 or less departments today are using drones, and this is out of over 3,000 departments. Now the chart that I'm showing there, and it's really hard to see, but what that's stating is that the pinkish area is the number of departments that are only consisting of career firefighters. The smaller sliver is those that are mixed between career firefighters and volunteer, and then the biggest chunk is volunteer. So even if you just take the majority of those that are not just volunteer, where they're going to have the most budget constraints, you still have a huge opportunity as a manufacturer or a software provider to really go after this market, and again, not go after it for the revenue that it could produce, but for the opportunity that can validate this technology for the long term. Now, when we look at law enforcement, we're talking about a slightly smaller population, 1.1 million law enforcement agents in the United States, and this is dispersed over 18,000 agencies, and these are federal agencies, state agencies, and municipalities. I just did some brief research into how many times that there would be an opportunity. There's 240 million 911 calls each year in the United States. And that's responding to 31.4 million individuals, unique individuals that are requesting police help. So this technology can here serve another purpose in all of these calls that occur each year. The map on the left, just another claim saying that this is not a regional thing. This is the population of law enforcement agents by state. It's not regional. It's not just in the United States. This is a global opportunity for us to develop technology that really has meaning. From my estimation, again, there's about 800 law enforcement agencies that are using drones today out of the 18,000. So there's still a huge opportunity for us to pioneer something very important. I don't know if you saw on the first slide, but I keep reiterating that the regulations that come out and in this kind of questionable environment that we have with how drones will progress because of regulations, we can move forward confidently with public safety because they're the least likely to be impacted by regulations. That's probably the industry that will have the most longevity if something were to happen. So search and rescue is a little harder to put into numbers, but I think that most of us in this room could agree that search and rescue operations of drones is probably the most important use case for this technology. Just to give the scope of it, the United States Coast Guard goes on 17,000 search and rescue missions a year, or they have 17,000 missing people claims that they have to go after a year. And the National Park Service responds to 11 search and rescue missions a day. So that gives you an idea of how many times that this technology is deployed. Now, I tried to show the same thing where this isn't a regional thing, and maybe some of the consolidation of fire departments and law enforcement agencies are in the eastern United States, but a lot of these search and rescue missions where there's a lot of open land, those are occurring in the western United States, but this is a global thing. So what you're seeing is the green areas are going to be where there's a national park or recreation area, and the red highlights that I put on there are the 5 locations within the National Park Service that consists of 50% or more of all the search and rescue missions. And I listed those places if you're interested, kind of midway through that slide. But again, Romeo has been a part of this, and I think a lot of the people in this room can validate this, that drones have been a part of saving lives to date. And I think we might be progressing in the triple digits where consumer drones have been a part of saving lives. And I think a lot of people in this room have played some role in that. But again, because regulations are the least likely to impact the use of drones going forward, I think that everyone in this room should understand that this is where we should be putting a lot of our focus. This is where we should be putting investment of our time and our efforts and, listening to the needs so that we can develop products that have the most meaning. So when we talk about the capabilities of thermal imaging. Thermal imaging has been used for decades for search and rescue missions, mostly on manned aircraft, but over the last more recent decade or so, they've been used on unmanned systems, and in the last, say, 5 years, more so on these small unmanned systems. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the capabilities and what these cameras can do. First, I'm going to talk about FLIR's proprietary MSX image blending, how that works, and what it can mean for public safety. I'll talk about selecting color palettes and why you would choose one over another for public safety missions. I'll talk to you a little bit about isotherms and how that can play a role in public safety, especially searching for people. Radiometry and whether that is useful or not in public safety. I'll talk about covering ground, which is related to field of view, lenses, resolution, and selecting the best camera for your mission. And then I'll talk a little bit about best practices. Going back real quick, when I talked about search and rescue, I did a survey like Romeo as well, which is the Great Minds Think Alike. That was not stolen from him or he didn't steal it from me. But I did a survey as well recently with a couple hundred departments asking some of their best practices and feedback. And one thing that I found interesting is 100% of every respondent said that they are using their drones for search and rescue missions. And that search and rescue was a key driver of them getting their drone program started. So really understanding the search and rescue market is going to be key for all of public safety and all of the manufacturers and software providers to really understand. Okay, so FLIR MSX, some of you have seen this slide before, but hopefully I frame it in a different way. Basically what MSX is it stands for multispectral dynamic imagery that takes a visible and a thermal image and blends them together. And this is a FLIR proprietary technology. And it's only available when you have a visible and a thermal camera within the same system that are communicating with one another. And how this works is it takes the edges of the visible image and embosses it over the thermal image to give you more image texture, to give it more detail, and give it more clarity. So if you look at the image on the left, which is just purely a thermal image of a vending machine, and the image on the right, which is going to be the MSX blended imagery, you can see that there is detail that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. You can see the products behind the glass, which you couldn't see through. You could see the information on the placards, the words and things that don't have their own unique thermal signature that's created, and then also numbers on the buttons. So can anybody tell me an interesting use case for public safety using this technology? Any hands? I'll take them. There we go. License plates. That's useful. Anything else? If I have to tell you all of them, you guys are definitely getting your values worth out of coming to this presentation, because I'm teaching you everything. Okay, so addresses, license plates, serial numbers. If I'm wearing a jersey, what number's on that jersey? If I'm wearing a plaid shirt, what that plaid pattern looks like. You're not getting any of that data. And I'm actually going to grab two devices really quick and hand those around that have MSX. They're just for cell phones, so it's lower resolution. But if you look at things like the floor, look at me standing here, look at the words on the slides, you wouldn't see that with just thermal. So let's talk about a little bit about color palettes. When you're looking at thermal imaging, what it's doing is it's taking the radiation that is being either produced by living things or absorbed or reflected off of every physical thing that you see. And it's taking that information and translating it either to numerical temperature data or a visible image. So FLIR cameras offer a variety of color palettes, and these are supposed to be used to enhance your ability to see your target and do your job. But incorrect use of using a color palette could make things much harder. So the most common color palettes are white hot and black hot. As the name states, white hot is going to be the hottest thing within the scene is going to be white. The coldest thing is going to be black, and then there's going to be grayscale in between showing the range of temperature. And the inverse on black hot, the hottest thing is going to be black, the coldest thing is going to be white, and then the inverse as you work through different temperatures within the scene. However, these are not negatives of one another. They do serve a different purpose. For instance, if you are flying a drone in a very emissive environment, let's say a desert in Tucson, and the sun has been beating down on it all day, if you go to white hot, you're just going to see white because everything that has been exposed to the sun all day is going to be roughly in the same temperature range, and everything is going to be washed out. So if you flip over to black hot, you're going to start seeing things pop out of the scene that you weren't able to see otherwise. So don't see these as basically the same thing. Know that you should be using them in conjunction, back and forth flipping to be able to identify different things. You may have seen the colorful palettes that FLIR cameras also provide. Those are supposed to be used for situations where there's a large range of temperature within the given scene. So if you are doing it for a utility inspection, you're able to see that something is significantly hotter than the scene around them and then see variations within that range. But these would not necessarily be that useful for doing search and rescue missions. Black hot, white hot are going to be the best, especially when there's a difference of 30 degrees or less of variation between your target and the surrounding environment. That would be kind of the benchmark, is 30 degrees or less, use white hot or black hot. So isotherms are a way that you can set a parameter of temperatures that you want to see highlighted within the image. And to those, to some like Garrett Brill, who I would think a large number of you know, would say that this is a game changer within public safety. However, talking to some of my FLIR colleagues and people that have been working with thermal imaging for a long time say, yes, it's amazing, but be cautious not to rely on this solely, because there's a lot of inputs that come into getting this type of imagery that you need to understand to get something quality and to be confident in what your results are. So things that can impact your ability to see something through isotherm is the environment around you, this temperature of your skin, because that could be changing as the temperature of the surroundings varies. Also, the material that your clothing is made out of and how much of you is exposed. So if you're butt naked, it's probably the best situation to see you. And then also body fat can play a role. So understanding these things and also the variables that go into radiometry can impact your ability to see your target. So according to Garrett, and he provided this information for me, is if for firefighting applications using isotherm, you should be setting the high. There's three areas that you have to fill in. You should be setting the high at 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. You should be setting the mid at 300 degrees Fahrenheit and the low at 150 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason for this is that at 150 degrees, you should be extinguishing everything that falls at that parameter or higher. Everything else will be showing red. When you're using the white hot ISO palette, it'll be showing red. But if you start seeing areas of pink, that could mean that there's a hazardous material that's fueling the fire, and that this is something where you should be responding as a hazmat case. or mission. When it comes to finding people, you should be setting the high at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the low or the mid at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and you should be setting the low as, this is the coolest thing to see these cameras coming up. This is valuable, I can tell. No pictures of me up until now, so not that valuable. But you should be setting the low as the ambient temperature will allow. Now, if you're dealing in situations where the temperature outside is over 85 degrees Fahrenheit, isotherm is not likely going to be very useful for you. It's likely everything is going to blend in and everything is going to be highlighted. So that's going to be your benchmark at about 85 degrees. Turn isotherm off, use white hot, black hot, and if that's not working, maybe the thermal imaging is not going to do anything for you. Now, you could say that in situations that the ambient temperature is that warm, that it's likely going to be in the middle of the day, and if you're in the middle of the day, you could use just an optical camera, or a visible camera. But just these are some best practices when it comes to using isotherm, but use them with caution. So when it comes to radiometry, radiometry is the process of taking that radiated energy that comes off of everything and translating it into a temperature. And when you're dealing with a radiometric camera, you're able to see the temperature of every pixel within that scene. So the reason that this is important is for utility type inspections where say a component has a range of normal operating temperature. When it falls outside of that range, either it's failing or it has already failed. And using a radiometric thermal imaging camera can tell you that information. However, it's not that important for public safety missions to know the actual temperature of something. The relative temperature that this thing is hot and I can detect that there is a person there is more important than saying, what is the temperature of that person? Are they running a fever? We don't really care about that in public safety as much. So in communication with some people within public safety that uses these cameras regularly, and some people within FLIR that I've talked to about this, there are no known use cases for radiometry in public safety. You may see cameras out there like the Zenmuse XT R, the Duo Pro R, the Duo R, the View Pro R. That R is saying radiometry, and for public safety, you can basically say it's not necessary. If you want to spend some extra money on it, fantastic, but it's not necessary, so we can put that to bed. I know that this isn't necessarily useful information because I'm saying don't worry about it, but it eliminates that confusion in the market of whether you need this type of camera. So covering ground and field of view and lens size and resolution is probably, these are the questions I get the most on a daily basis. And this is the conversations that you likely have about thermal imaging cameras. And so I'm going to make a valiant attempt for like the third time to put this information in a new package and try to explain it so that it makes more sense to you of why this matters and what you're giving and taking when you do change from one resolution or one lens size to another. When you have a different resolution and a different lens size, you're going to get a different field of view, which is going to be a different amount of the area that is going to be then consolidated all into the number of pixels that is confined into your device or into the thermal image camera. So you can see it with a wider field of view, which is going to be a lower number within the range of lenses, is going to be the widest field of view, less specificity and less detail of the target, but you're going to see more at a given time. When you move up to a higher number of lens, which is going to be a more narrow field of view, you get a lot more detail, but you see a lot less at a given time. So this was like the bane of my existence for the last few weeks, so bear with me. But when we're talking about a use case, if someone says, hey, I want to find some ducks that are sitting on a pond, or trying to find a person, or anything within aerial thermal imaging, I look at four things. What is the resolution of the camera? What is the field of view that the camera offers? What is the size of the target? And how far away from the target are you going to be flying? Those are the four things. If I know that, I can tell you whether it's a realistic opportunity for using thermal imaging drones or not. So the green box represents a thermal image. And horizontally, we have 640 pixels within that image. And vertically, we have 512 pixels within that image. I put, for example, and these numbers are not necessarily accurate, but you have a 2 by 2 foot object, and at whatever altitude this is, that 2 by 2 foot object takes up 5 by 5 pixel cluster within the image. That is the minimum that you would want that object to take up within that image to be able to detect it. If you have less than that, you might miss it altogether because each pixel is going to be sending out that temperature information, and it needs to be in a cluster all together to make it so it's something that you could see with your eyes. And I put a 6 by 6 foot object on the right-hand side just for kind of comparison. So as you fly closer to the object, it's going to take up more pixels within the image. You're going to have an easier time seeing it. You're going to get more detailed imagery. So the closer you can fly, the more you're going to see. However, the field of view, the amount you're seeing at a given time, is going to shrink because you're looking very specifically at a few things. And inversely, if you fly higher, you're going to see more of the space, but your the 2 by 2 foot object is no longer going to be picked up by that 5 by 5 pixels. And even in this case, the 6 by 6 foot object is now too small within the scene to be detected by the thermal imaging camera. So flying closer or higher, that's going to be the range or the distance from the target is going to be a huge factor. Now, when you're going from a 640 resolution camera to a 336 resolution camera, the image itself, if I flip back and forth, the image itself does not get smaller. That's an X saying it doesn't do this. What it does is the pixels within the image get larger. So if I put these two images together, a 2 by 2 foot object taking up 5 by 5 pixels on a 336 camera can maybe be flown at 125 feet, for instance. The objects look bigger, but you're getting the same amount of detail because they're taking up the same number of pixels within that image, but you're seeing less at a given time because the pixels are larger. Now, if you go to the 640, you see a 2 by 2 foot object, 5 by 5 pixels so you can identify it, but you're seeing a whole range of space more at any given time. So if you are doing a search and rescue mission and you're flying up and down, doing a zigzag pattern, and you're trying to find someone, it's going to cut down the time in half, potentially, by using a high-resolution camera. And then you have lenses, and this is maybe the least attractive part, so maybe you don't have to take pictures of this part, but when you have a 9mm lens, it cuts down the amount you're seeing at a given time. But as you progress with a 13mm lens, it's cutting it down even more. The image becomes more detailed, but it takes up more pixels within the image. And the 19mm lens, even closer, even narrower field of view. So hopefully all of that makes sense, and you are taking pictures, so I'll let you do that before I change slides. But my good pal, John Anderson, gave me some slides that make this even better. I tried to explain this before I had these slides, but here is an image of a 640 resolution camera on the left and a 336 camera on the right. You could see the pixel size is larger, right? That I think that this is very digestible, that the pixels get larger within the image even though the image size stays the same. Now this is two cameras being flown at 100 feet AGL with both 9mm lenses for each. You can see that the field of view of the 640 resolution camera is 69 degrees, which is 69 degrees this way, by 56 degrees this way. That's how much you would see if you were looking straight down. And that covers from end to end 121 feet this way and 97 feet this way. So you're able to see that amount of space at a given time. And if at 100 feet, your subject would take up that 5 by 5 pixels or more, you would be able to reliably identify and detect something is there. When you're dealing with a 336 resolution image, you're dealing with 37 degrees this way, 27 degrees this way, which is significantly smaller. And you can see it's about half of the distance that you're covering at a given time, looking with a 336 camera versus a 640 at 63 feet to 48 feet. So as we move through the different resolutions, you can see that we're going to have a smaller field of view. It's going to take up less, you're going to see less of the environment at a given time. Now if we compare a 19mm lens on a 640 camera, and for those that have used thermal before, to me a 19mm lens is pretty dang narrow, has the same field of view as a 9mm camera on a 336. So the detection capabilities of a 640 camera is hugely, vastly better than a 336. And if you look at a 25mm, which we've only released with one of the UAS products on the FLIR side, this is meant for identifying a very specific component within, a power line or a power pole on the top of a power pole. And that's very, very narrow field of view. It's about the same as a 13mm camera on a 336 resolution camera. So again, resolution does make a big difference in the ability to detect something. And you're getting higher quality imagery, you're getting more detail, and you're seeing more at a given time. So for public safety, if you're doing anything with searching for people, I recommend high resolution all day long if you can justify the expense. But that's That's the reality of it. It is a higher expense, but it is worth it. If you're getting into doing a drone program and using thermal imaging at all, scrimping is not going to do you any benefits in this regard. So let's talk about a few best practices. Like I said, I took this survey, a couple hundred people gave me some information, and I tried to consolidate those down into what were the key takeaways. And they're very basic, and I don't feel bad giving them to you, but they're really basic things that you probably already know, but they're things to keep in mind, whether you're developing products for public safety, whether you are trying to get your program to exist or to be larger, or you're developing on their behalf, you're selling this product, you should focus on these things. So first is it starts with the chief, meaning that it doesn't matter whether you've convinced all your buddies within your platoon. It doesn't matter whether you've convinced the local government. It doesn't matter whether you've convinced the public. It matters whether you've convinced the chief of a department that this technology is meaningful. Once that happens, programs are developed. And this is coming from programs that exist in the United States today. This isn't me making this stuff up. They say that our chief needed to buy in before we ever did anything. So keep that in mind, that there is a pinnacle of who you're trying to appeal to, and it's the chiefs of these departments. The second part is practice makes perfect, and Romeo touched on this, and again, it's great minds think alike, that if you are going to have a drone program, flying your first time in a field and your second time in a real live fire case is not going to be your best, you're not going to get the best outcome. What you should be doing is not only using them regularly, but experimenting with how these products develop meaning or usefulness for you. And I think that aerial thermal imaging, what it's doing is it's giving you greater efficiency, and it's giving you greater safety by not putting people in harm's way to get this really important data. So practice as much as possible, and then you're going to have a drone program that is taken seriously. Establishing policies and procedures. This would relate to who can fly the drone, when they can fly the drone, and in what cases, how they're flying the drone. Would also relate to things like the pre-safety checks that you would do before taking off. These policies need to be in place before you really ever see a drone program getting taken off the ground. So if you're involved in this at all, understanding what these policies and procedures should be would be the greatest accelerator to getting drone programs created. And from everyone that I've spoken to in public safety, they're held to a higher standard, not only internally in the pride of their job, but also the public perception of what they do. So because of this higher standard that they're set to, they need to be trained well, and they need to know what they're doing with this technology for it to have any meaning. Now, the most important one to me is this one, which is getting a department to move from this is a cool toy to this is a tool that we use only for serious operations. I think that this is the biggest mistake, is to stay into the look at the cool technology that we have too long, or do it at all. This technology should be taken seriously because you have this whole public perception to maintain that you are not using these for stupid things like delivering donuts or taking funny photos of somebody while they're in the shower room or something like that. You're using this for real life hazardous occasions where people's lives are at risk. And if you're using this technology as a toy, it will always be seen as just people trying to get toys into their department. And getting over that as soon as possible is going to be for the benefit of the industry and the benefit of your department. In that same vein, being transparent with the public of that you're using drones and how you're using the drone specifically, maybe even sharing some of those procedures and policies that you have in place, is going to be the best for any department, because public perception does play a significant role in how the drones are being used, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But also keeping accurate flight logs, which can be difficult, but I think DJI has put out some software yesterday that should help with some of that. And also retaining any assets, video or photos that come from the drone each flight, retaining them, archiving them, and keeping them long-term. Because if there's any accusation of a department misusing this technology, you can revert back and say, this is what we got out of it, this is why we were using it. Understanding the equipment, and this goes to understanding the capability of the drones, meaning flight time, payload capacity that it can withstand. That's important for any department, but also understanding that you need to have spare things like batteries, propellers, SD cards to make sure that you're doing your mission, you're able to conduct your mission each time, and firmware updates. And I know that everyone in this room, because you're here at a DJI thing, firmware upgrades can be a sticking point. but getting in the habit of having a good procedure of how you check firmware upgrades regularly is going to ensure that you're able to fly your mission when you get on site. And the last thing is safety first, which I think is pretty commonplace, but these are, in the drone world, there's different things you need to think about when it comes to safety. Making sure that your home point is set, making sure that you have enough space to land when you come back. All of these things will increase the likelihood of longevity with using this technology and staying within this industry. A few other things that came out of that survey, and there were a lot more questions, but maybe some of them weren't as clear as I would have liked, is one, I said, here's a bunch of things that thermal imaging drones can do. What is important to you using this technology in public safety? And validating for me and my job and what I believe in, thermal was atop all of the uses of using a drone, and it was at 4.54 out of 5. And I will say, unfortunately, these were all people that I relate to or I communicate with because of thermal imaging, but it is interesting to know that they do have this value in using thermal imaging from the sky. And this is in comparison to just visible cameras, being able to display it on a big TV for a chief, or being able to send it wirelessly over the internet so that they can see what's going on. Automatic autonomous missions and things like that. So thermal reigns supreme, which is really great for me, and I didn't fudge these numbers. I'll show you the data if you'd like. And the other question I asked is, what is the reason your department is using drones less than they could be using them? And 70% said cost. So everyone that's involved in the manufacturing or development of this technology, whether it's drone technology, thermal technology, needs to keep in mind that cost is still a hindrance for these departments. And because we can get so much meaning and so much validation from public safety, we should be considering costs as being hindering us, if we set it too high, from really expanding in this market. Going through the other things, 26% said that regulations, whether the regulations, the fear of future regulations have kept them out of growing their department's drone program, or regulations like beyond visual line of sight or night flights has kept them from using them more. Access to budget, which I think is something that we can address over time, 22% said that's the reason. Well, those are things that, like I said, can be addressed as this technology is seen more and more widely as being useful and meaningful. 17% on both, the technology just doesn't do what they want it to do, which is good for both FLIR and DJI to hear that only 17% are saying, I want to fly this mission, but it just doesn't do it, because we have engineers that can work through that and bring that number down. Also, 17% say they don't have the available personnel to fly the drones, which this is not something we can do. This is a department figuring out whether you bring in a civilian pilot to fly drones when you go out flying, or you're identifying some people within the department to fly drones. And then 9% is public opinion, which is another one that we can bring that down. We could bring that to zero by just a common understanding that, of course, police departments need a car, and fire departments need a hose, and they also need drones. And we can get there. With the people in this room, we're going to all be pioneering this together. So that's my belief, that some of these things are fixable. Now, some specific uses of aerial thermal imaging drones. First, finding people. I'll detail it a little bit more than I have already. Firefighting, which is also very basic, and then anti-poaching, which is not so common, but I just got some really cool assets from one of our partners and I wanted to share that. But some other uses that drones are being used in public safety: accident reconstruction, anti-trafficking, both for drugs and illicit materials, and also anti-trafficking of people, damage assessment after natural disasters, and then SWAT and high risk, basically putting the drone first to search out a place in high risk situations. So for finding people, again, I will say it 1,000 times that this is probably the most important use case of drones, period. Any drones, this is probably the most important thing, and the thing that is making an event like this revolving around the enterprise use of drones viable. One thing that I think is not really said too often is when you're flying these missions with a drone looking for a person, you should encourage them to get bigger, move around, and make sure that they're taking up as many pixels within the image as possible. So having lights and having maybe a siren on the drone makes sense in this regard, where you're encouraging them to realize someone's looking for them and start doing something so that you can see them. When I talked about isotherms and also just using this technology in general, false positives are better than false negatives, meaning that if you think you see something on the drone and you go scope it out and there's nothing, that's a better situation than flying over something, your target, and missing it and saying, don't worry about it, don't go over there, we already checked it out. or sending in a police unit because they don't think that the perpetrator is there and he's armed, and you're like, don't worry about it, we've already checked it out, no one's there, and then you get a surprise. So keep in mind, if you think you see something, say something. And using this technology, you have to be really confident that you know what you're looking for and that you can get that data, or else you shouldn't use it at all. And then the last thing is isotherms may help, and keeping in mind that you want to be responsible with the use of isotherms. What this is a search and rescue mission where a teenager got lost hiking. They sent up an aerial thermal imaging unit and were able to find the person. Here you see the rescue mission happening on the left, where there's the mountain rescue person and his canine unit that were able to do. The middle picture, I think, is at 200 feet off the ground. And then the image on the right is a toddler that wandered off from a campsite and was missing for a couple hours and was just walking down a path. They used their aerial thermal imaging drone, flew it over, were able to find the kid. Successful mission. In firefighting, and some have seen this video, I said it's only 95% new, but there are almost 1.4 million structural fires in the United States alone each year, and drones can be used pretty much in all of them. And this does about $14.3 billion of damage. So when you're using an aerial thermal imaging drone, you could be sending this information back over a closed URL with a firewall to the chief or someone that really understands structural fires, that can give expert advice, that isn't in the heat of the moment, to say, this is the best way to approach fighting this fire. Do we have enough personnel or assets on the scene to fight this fire appropriately? And all these assets can be used for training in the future, and they could be used as, for lack of a better term, marketing assets to say, we need more budget. This is what we're doing with this technology. This is how it's providing use. And now you have this imagery that isn't just a contained environment where you do training. It's real life situations where you can show the dangers that firefighters are put in on a regular basis, but you're getting all of this without putting a person in harm's way. So that's where really a lot of the value is driven from firefighting. I work pretty closely with Sea Shepherd and Ocean Alliance, and they're basically, you may be seeing their show on Whale Wars on Discovery Channel, I believe, and they basically are in it for preserving wildlife habitat and environment. So I'm going to play this video, and this is kind of a testimony of how they're using thermal imaging drones and drones in general.
I love flying drones, I really do. As a kid, I've always wanted to fly, and drones let you do just that. They let you look at the world from a different view, a view most people don't get to see every day. Drones take photography and videography to like a new level, a level that was unattainable until recent years. Here on Milagro 3, drones have proven to be one of the most valuable assets we have battling poaching in the Gulf of California. It all starts when the officer on watch suspects a fishing boat may be fishing illegally. The officer then takes the radar and studies the movement of the boat in question. If the boat is fishing within the restricted refuge, they become a target. After a quick setup, the drone is launched and heading towards its new target. We are able to fly high above, documenting the fishing boat's illegal activity without them even knowing we are watching. All necessary footage is gathered from the drone, and the nets our crew physically pull up are then used as evidence and given to the necessary authorities. Thanks to accessible technology, both the Farley Mowat and the Sam Simon are equipped with stealth night vision drones, ensuring that poachers are no longer safe under the sun nor the darkness of night. Whether they are pulling out an illegal gill net, or pulling in an endangered totoaba fish, we are there, and even if they don't know it, we are watching.
So again, not everyone is going to be doing anti-poaching stuff, and especially on the sea, but I think that these are the kind of cases that are validating for this technology. My buddy Ian that works at Ocean Alliance spoke at the UN General Council before Leonardo DiCaprio and after Sir Richard Branson. So this was a huge audience to say, does this technology do anything meaningful? And they were displaying imagery and things like this. And so in public safety, the more assets that we can show the world of how this technology is useful, the better, the more longevity we'll have in this industry. The last thing that is the only pitch thing is if you want more training, we do have our infrared training center that does small UAS courses. So you could be certified as a level 1 thermographer using drones specifically. Now they do go over utility inspections and things of that nature, but there's also portions that are about public safety.